8 years ago, I found myself waking up each morning in misty Seattle, especially misty since I live on a houseboat right on 40 feet of water, so the mist just rises up around me, to what I knew was an impossible question, best kind of question there is, one that you know there is no answer to, no definite answer, which doesn't mean that you can't try, of course. And the question was, what actually happened one desert night, half the world and nearly half of history away? What happened, that is, on that Ramadan night in the year 612, when Muhammad received the first revelation of the Quran up there on the mountain outside Mecca? I have an impossible bottle to go with it. No, here's one that's open. Yeah. Why is this an impossible question? Because this is the core mystical moment of Islam. And mystical moments, of course, defy empirical analysis, let alone psychological analysis. But the question wouldn't let go of me. Now, I was fully aware that for someone as secular as I obviously am, I'm a resolutely agnostic Jew. Just asking this question could be seen at the very least as a form of immense chutzpah. You know what chutzpah is, right? Oh, God, I get to teach Yiddish. This is wonderful. It's a Yiddish word, which means, Well, the thing about Yiddish words is that they don't have direct meanings in English, which is an impoverished language compared to Yiddish. But let's say it just means unmitigated gall, cheek, like how dare you, right? But then, I think of writing and I think of asking such questions like this as exploration, and all exploration involves transgression of a boundary one way or another. But some boundaries are bigger than others. So a human encountering the divine is about as big a boundary as you can possibly get. Not a matter of fact to the rationalist, but of wishful fiction. Like most of us, I like to think of myself as rational, which might be when I looked at the earliest accounts that we have of that night, the accounts written by the earliest extant Islamic historians, like Ibn Ishaq. What struck me even more than what happened was what did not happen. Muhammad did not come running down the mountain shouting hallelujah. He did not come floating off the mountain as though walking on air. There were no choirs of angels, nobody playing harps, no ethereal chorus and so on. He did not radiate light and joy. No elation, no ecstasy, no golden aura surrounding him, no flames rising from his head, no sense of an absolute foreordained role as the messenger of God. Not even the whole of the Quran fully revealed, just 5 brief verses. And this struck me because none of this was what I would have expected. He did none of the things that might make it easy to cry foul, to sort of denigrate the whole account as a pious fake, which of course people have tried to do. Quite the contrary. In Muhammad's own reported words, in Ibn Ishaq, he was convinced at first that what had happened that night on the mountain could not have been real. At best, he thought it had to have been a hallucination, a trick of the eye or the ear, perhaps, or his own mind working against him. At worst, possession, and he'd been seized by a jinn, an evil spirit out to deceive him, even to crush the life out of him. And in fact, he was so sure that he could only be Majnun, possessed by a jinn, that when he found himself still alive, his first impulse was to finish the job himself. It was to leap off the highest cliff and escape the terror of what he'd experienced by putting an end to all experience. So the man who fled down the mountain that night did not tremble with joy. He shook with a stark, primordial fear. He was not overwhelmed by conviction. He was overwhelmed with doubt. And that panicked disorientation, that sundering of everything familiar, that daunting acknowledgement of something beyond human comprehension can only be called a terrible awe. Now that's a kind of old-fashioned word nowadays, isn't it? Awe. I mean, it's kind of somewhat difficult to grasp when everything seems so awesome. Right? A new app is awesome. A viral video is awesome. Or as they say in the States, awesome. Right? With the exception perhaps of a massive earthquake or here a massive tsunami, we're protected from real awe. We close the doors, we hunker down, we convince ourselves that we're in control, or at least we hope for control. And we do our best to ignore the fact that we don't always have control, and that not everything can be explained. Now, I don't think it matters whether you're a rationalist or a mystic in this case. Whether you think the words Muhammad heard that night came from inside him or from outside him, to me it does not matter, because it's absolutely clear to me from that earliest account that he did experience them, and his experience is what interests me, is what I respect, the integrity of his experience, and that he experienced them with a force that would did shatter his sense of himself and his world, and totally transformed this otherwise modest man into a radical force for change. And this is the moment, reading those early accounts, when Muhammad came alive for me. When I began to see him as a real human being, it was like a sort of door opened and, oh my God, this is real. This man is real. And it was precisely his doubt that brought him alive for me. That's what allowed me to begin to see him in full, to accord him the integrity of reality, not a two-dimensional cipher, but a real three-dimensional human being reacting in such an utterly human way to this shattering experience. And the more I thought about it then, the more it made sense that he doubted. Because actually his doubt seems to me the strongest argument for the historical reality of that night. Now I know that, what I've just said will strike many people here as, let's just say, unexpected, even shockingly strange. But if so, I'd propose that that's because, we've been misled into demonizing doubt and idolizing belief. I mean, to doubt is to think, to question, to explore. And to think, as Descartes said, is to be human. And in fact, the Quran said this way before Descartes. Two of the words it keeps using, it uses more than perhaps any other words, are consider and think. Think and consider. It's trying to persuade you, it wants you to think. Which of course has not stopped many conservative Muslim theologians from refusing to do precisely that. Because they maintain that the account I just told you of Muhammad's trying to kill himself on Mount Hira shouldn't even be mentioned, despite the fact that it's right there in the earliest Islamic biographies. They insist that Muhammad never doubted for even a single moment, let alone despaired. And he did over the next 2 years. 2 years wrestling with doubt, wrestling with himself in what many centuries later St. John of the Cross would call the dark night of the soul, as he waited for a second revelation. I mean, the standard, the expected, the legendary account would be the first revelation comes and then all the others keep coming, right? The flow, the door is open, the tap is turned on, the spigot is turned on, they will just come in a tremendous flow now and so on. And that's not what happened. 2 years. 2 years went by until the second revelation came. It's called the Revelation of the Morning, and it starts off saying, Muhammad, we have not abandoned you. because that's what he felt, abandoned. You know, was he being punished for having doubted in the first place? Had he been abandoned? Had he really just imagined it all? Was he merely mad and so on? Surely he has to have asked himself all these questions. And then finally comes the second revelation. No, it's okay. Let's keep on doing this. But this is my problem with the conservative interpretation, the conservative demand that we edit the life of Muhammad, that we cut out certain parts because they make him appear less than perfect. I have a problem with perfection. My problem is that I find it intensely uninteresting. Have you ever seen a perfect face? I mean, okay, you want a perfect face? Let's try Nicole Kidman. Yes, one of the most bland, boring faces you could possibly imagine. And of course, a pretty bland, boring personality to go with it. You know, a face that's absolutely symmetrical. Eyes that sort of look at you and you want to sort of knock on the forehead and say, hey, is anybody there? Anybody in there, right? Symmetry is inhuman. It's just like something's missing, some vitality, some realness is missing. It's like, you know, if you want to draw a perfect circle, you can take, what do you call it, a compass, and you can draw a perfect circle. Of course, you can do it on your computer. The computer will do a perfect circle for you. And you look at it and you think, well, so what? It's a perfect circle. It's nothing to look at. It's just a circle. But if you are a Japanese Zen master and you dip your brush in ink that you have ground and prepared yourself, and you breathe very deep and close your eyes as we just did and prepare yourself, and then take another very, very deep breath and in one giant motion go, right. And the circle will not be perfect. Very often it's open. It doesn't even close itself. And you can stand there and look at this circle in awe and delight and amazement for hours because it's beautiful, because its imperfection is so beautiful. So what exactly is imperfect about doubt? Now, you know, it's true that doubt has a terrible reputation, even among its advocates. I mean, here's Voltaire, the great grand skeptic. Doubt, he said, is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is an absurd one. You're allowed to laugh here. It's okay. It's Voltaire, right? It's okay. I'm not talking theology. You can laugh, please. It's philosophy. And philosophy is often very funny. And in fact, there was a time when all theology was considered philosophy by Islamic theologians, when they were much more philosophically minded and open-minded than many are today. In fact, philosophy comes from Persia. Okay, so Voltaire, doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is an absurd one, which seems, satisfyingly witty, right? But it's still based on the idea that doubt is necessarily unpleasant. Though actually not nearly as unpleasant as it was for St. Augustine, because this is how Augustine wrote of his moment of conversion to Christianity. And I quote, "There was infused in my heart something like the light of full certainty, and all the gloom of doubt vanished away." And there you have it. I mean, metaphors don't come much more loaded than this one. You've got light and joy on the one hand, darkness and gloom on the other. And yet, Augustine's image, I know this is almost an entirely Muslim audience, but this Christian church father's image has sunk deep into the minds of just about all of us. We've been made so fearful of doubt that we treat it as a character flaw. We even think of it as an outright enemy sometimes. I mean, you still hear people saying that they believe something beyond all shadow of a doubt. So doubt then becomes a sort of ominous dark cloud, sort of in the blue sky of conviction. Under stress, we may doubt our senses, as Muhammad did that night on the mountain, or doubt the evidence of our own eyes. We speak of someone being plagued or tormented or racked by doubt, like it's medieval torture, subjected to the psychic equivalent, in fact, of torture, the limbs of the mind stretched beyond endurance. But really, is the light of full certainty preferable? I mean, something about the light of full certainty makes me think of that proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. You know that? The light of the oncoming train? Yeah. Such certainty terrifies me. I recognize it in fanatics and fundamentalists of all religious stripes, in gurus and demagogues and dictators, in anyone utterly convinced of their own rightness, their own inerrancy. In fact, I find it hard. In fact, I find it impossible to trust anyone who never experiences doubt. Which is why I could begin to see Muhammad as real, because doubt is essential to faith. And yes, I do mean essential. It has to be one of the multiple ironies of history. I'm sort of going around all over the place here because when I write out a talk, I keep on changing my mind at the last minute, and those lines go, you can see, it looks very peculiar. So just bear with me here. In fact, it has to be one of the multiple ironies of history that a favorite expletive of Islamist fundamentalists in particular is the same one used by the Christian fundamentalists known as crusaders. And that is infidel, which comes from the Latin for faithless. And this is especially ironic because their absolutism is in fact the opposite of faith, which means that they are the real infidels. They're the ones without faith. They are the faithless, the ones who proclaim themselves to be the most faithful, the true Muslims, the good Muslims, or Jews, or Hindus, or Christians, or Buddhists. Because what's really being betrayed here is faith itself. When we conflate faith with conviction, we eviscerate faith. We obviate all need for it. Conviction just replaces it. It's because you see, faith is not the same thing as belief. Faith is something else. It isn't about what you know or think you know. It's about what you don't know and what you can't know. It's about uncertainty and the courage to commit yourself nonetheless. I mean, someone may be praised as being true to her beliefs. You've heard that phrase? Well, the man is true to his beliefs, right? As though the act of belief were a value in itself, a moral stance. Doesn't matter what the content of that belief is. And in religion, this can actually develop into a full-time occupation, a profession, an actual profession. You don't simply believe, you become a believer. Which means that you are defined by living in the state of belief, both in the eyes of others and in your own eyes. And belief then becomes an impassioned state of being, where the act of believing is more important than its content. And this is why, if you've ever noticed, the most ardent fundamentalists can very often turn into the most vehement atheists, flaming red socialists into deep blue conservatives, and hedonists into ascetics, and all, of course, the other way around. What they want is the passion, that conviction of belief. And you can bring that to just about anything. So, we tend to admire people of strong convictions, especially when their convictions agree with our own. And there are times when I admit even the most resolute agnostic like myself might kind of wistfully think of conviction as a kind of a restful place to be, a sort of a refuge from the hard work of thought, sort of, that state of being an intellectual couch potato is kind of enviable sometimes. You don't have to think anymore. Let's just sink into it and just say, yeah, I accept it all. No need to think anymore. Until that is, you find yourself up against the stone wall of someone whose mind is made up. And that phrase almost, it makes me think of an army cot in barracks. With the corners folded down so tight you have to struggle to get into it. Actually, that's the way they make the beds in hotel rooms nowadays too. You should get into the hotel room and you have to pull the whole thing apart just in order to get onto it. Everything's squared away. No soft fall, no creases, no loose ends. Right? The blanket's pulled really tight so as the sergeant can come along and bounce his coin off it and so on. I mean, this is a mind wrapped tight, like a mummy, right? Let no questions enter here. Let nothing human enter here. Let no humanity enter here. And the more firmly I hold a belief, and please note that word hold. I hold it. It's mine. I possess it, right? The more liable it is to fossilize into conviction, as tightly constricted as that army cot, or as a convict in his cell. Yes, a convict, because that's the other meaning of conviction, isn't it? Someone who's been convicted, who's walled up, shut in, shut off from the world, imprisoned. But it goes further. When my belief is so adamantly held that it becomes central to my identity, when I'm completely identified with it, then your disbelief or your belief in something else undermines not only the assumed truth of what I believe, but it undermines me, my whole identity. And this isn't just, like the I'm right, you're wrong of the schoolyard. It's I'm right, you're wrong, and your wrongness is a threat to my identity. Of course, it should come as no surprise that Samuel Johnson put it rather more elegantly than I do. He said, every man who attacks my belief diminishes in some degree my confidence in it, and therefore makes me uneasy. And I'm angry with him who makes me uneasy. And the unease comes from this, because to be secure in one's convictions, as they say, is in fact to be absurdly oxymoronic. I know there's actually no such word as oxymoronic in the Oxford English Dictionary, but there should be. It's when you live in a state of oxymoron. Oxymoronism, whatever. Conviction seems to be a state of great security. It isn't. It's really a state of great insecurity. Because to have the courage of one's convictions, as they say, which is, by the way, an accusation regularly made against agnostics. Yeah, they don't even have the courage of their convictions. Excuse me, what exactly is the connection between courage and conviction? To me, conviction is a refuge. It's actually a sign of lack of courage. Conviction doesn't require courage. So if I were to guard to gird myself, if I were to put on the psychic armor of righteousness, it's precisely because on some level, conscious or not, I'm aware of my vulnerability. I mean, why else would I need any kind of armor? I remember in the last years my mother was alive, she had really bad arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. And as it increased her grip on her body, and there was this really stiff gait, which did not, it wasn't a sign of strength, it was a sign of frailty. Right? Or perhaps conviction is really something else. Perhaps it's really an evasion. An evasion of a deeper, more complex, a far more challenging response to uncertainty, which is to embrace it. And this is where real faith comes in. Where absolute belief tries to expel doubt, faith walks with it. It offers no easy answers. Belief insists, while faith hopes and trusts. Belief is demanded, even imposed on pain of death. Faith is freely given. And this freedom means that faith is both difficult and stubborn. It involves an ongoing struggle, a continual questioning of what we think we know, a wrestling with issues and ideas. It goes hand in hand with doubt, in a never-ending conversation with it, and sometimes in conscious defiance of it. And for me, that defiance comes when it comes to the Middle East, where I lived for a long time. And where I know how totally absurd I sound when I say that I have faith that peace in the Middle East is possible. I say this despite the weight of everything I know, despite the ever-accumulating massive evidence to the contrary, despite the awful irony that 4 days after Martin Luther King Day, the antithesis of that man is going to be inaugurated as the president of my country. The tragedy of this, the awfulness, I'm sorry, I shouldn't even have brought it up. I should have stayed with MLK. I'm not convinced that the peace in the Middle East is possible. I mean, I'd be a total fool if I was, right? I can't say I believe it because I don't believe it. I know too much that says can't happen. In the light of everything I know, the weight of which feels far too heavy, there is no room for belief. All that's left is for me to have faith that it's possible, to commit myself, that is, to the idea of peace in the Middle East. And if you call this foolish on my part, that's fine. Because I'd much rather be a fool for hoping and for trying than for just giving up and saying, nothing to be done, right? And that's exactly why I have faith. Because of this temptation to throw up my hands in resignation and retreat into silence. Because despair, that is despair, the absence of hope, the absence of faith, and the absence of trust, that is self-fulfilling. Because if I conclude that something is impossible, I will stop acting in any way that might help make it possible. I will take it as a fait accompli, nothing to be done, and I'll retreat. And this would really be my own problem if it wasn't so widespread and thus so dangerous, because what we believe affects how we act, how we all act. If we all believe that peace is impossible anywhere, not only in the Middle East, or even, as in the minds of extremists, of course, undesirable, putting it mildly, then we'll act in such a way that we make it so. And we'll create that self-fulfilling prophecy of unending conflict, born out of the nihilism of despair. And this I simply refuse. Because there are times when, even though we might like to be rational, or might like to think of ourselves as rational, we need to be irrational. To not only accept doubt, but to go beyond it. Times of what I call creative irrationality. That is faith. Think about it. No act of heroism would be possible if rationality were to hold sway, and the imperative of self-preservation allowed to override the impulse to aid and help a stranger. No act of generosity would be possible. Nobody would ever fall in love. Nobody would ever place the interests of those they love above their own. We'd never be able to trust each other. We'd be trapped in the zero-sum game known as the prisoner's dilemma. Anyone heard of that? Yeah, decision-making. Where the only logic you have, in brief, you have two prisoners being interrogated separately, and if they both, refuse to talk, refuse to confess, then they'll both go free. But neither can trust the other. The only rational thing for each of them to do is to confess and go to jail. We'd be trapped. That's known as a zero-sum game. That's what we'd be trapped in. where the only logical solution is for both suspects to plead guilty and accept jail terms instead of maintaining innocence and going free. We never dare take a chance. Where rationality weighs probabilities and acts accordingly, creative irrationality weighs them and acts nonetheless, in defiance of them. And this is, okay, you can call it foolhardy, you can call it admirable, yeah. But there's only one thing certain, and that is that there are no certainties here, there are no guarantees, no assurance of reward. Because if assurance is what you want, then like those two prisoners, in this prisoner's dilemma, your only option is the dead end of conviction. You knew I was going to bring that up again, right? Okay. Didn't work. Okay, sorry. You're a tough audience. Now, so I insist on the possible, however improbable it might be, because I refuse to call closure on hope. And when I say hope, I do not mean blind, delusional hope, but conscious hope against the odds. The kind of hope that allows me to speak and to act and to not cave into the stone wall of the impossible. Because despair is a failure of the imagination, of the human ability to conceive of a different reality and to act accordingly. It's the inability to imagine oneself into the future. So by resisting despair, I rationally choose to be irrational. I defy my own disbelief. I place my trust in the future, in what I can't know, and that I believe, as an agnostic, can only be called an act of faith. And this is what we really mean when we say we have faith in someone. It's an expression of trust. I trust that you'll do what you promised to do. I trust that you'll keep your word. I trust that we'll work together. I trust in possibility. That's what it comes down to. Trust. The ability to trust, the willingness to do so, to open up minds, to take a risk. Because there's no guarantee that your trust will be well placed. To look for the best in each other, not the worst. So I want to end for now, in any case, because I hope you've got lots of questions. And I will try and answer. I mean, I will give answers, but when I don't know, I'll say so. I mean, there's one question I know is coming, to which I know my answer will be, I don't know. But I want to leave you with this thought for now. Because I know this is a country, a wonderful country, that perhaps it might do some good. And it's a definition of forgiveness. And I found it so powerful and so memorable because partly it's a play on what's written above the gates of hell in Dante's Inferno. Does anyone know what's written above there? Abandon hope, all ye who enter here. That is above the gates of hell in Dante's Inferno. So here's the definition of forgiveness that I heard, which entranced me the moment I heard it, and which I've been spreading around as much as I could, because I've had people email me afterwards saying, thank you so much for that. You just changed my whole day with this. I hope it changes more than a day for you. And I still don't know who said it. I don't know where it came from, and it doesn't matter. Here's the definition of forgiveness. Forgiveness is abandoning all hope of a perfect past. Yeah, the past was really bad. The past was totally imperfect. Let's get together and try and make the future better. So once again, forgiveness is abandoning all hope of a perfect past. Thank you.
Knowledge Box, the value-based media network.